Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports, covers the NBA. Down the stretch they come. And the Sixers add a little firepower. Some good news. Joel Embiid returned to the lineup on Saturday night, it looks like, Keith. And that really changes the dynamic of things. The Sixers finally, the Nets finally wrestled that first seed away from the Sixers. But getting Joel Embiid back, they'll get Durant back here soon. This should be a very interesting race with Milwaukee, a three-team race down the stretch. But what do you think of the Sixers and how they played without Joel Embiid and what that says about them down the stretch here?
They hung in there. I know the Nets passed them, but, I mean, they're a half game off. So they basically hung in there at the top of the conference. I was kind of worried that the Nets and Bucks would both catch them and move past them without Embiid, but they looked good, and I think that bodes well. Let's fingers crossed and do whatever other luck rituals we have to do to make sure the big man stays healthy the rest of the way, because clearly the entire league and playoffs and everything will be better with him. But I think now they've kind of shown, all right, if we need to get by for a little bit without him, we can do that. And I think that's a testament to the way the roster has been built now, the way they're coached, the stepping up that guys like Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, a whole host of the role players have done. So yeah, I think this is really good for them, and I think they're well positioned now to hang right in there and continue to fight with the Nets and the Bucks for positioning all the way through to the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you before we kind of dig a little deeper on them. In the East right now, is there a fourth team for you, or is this kind of shaping up to be a three-team Eastern Conference race?
No, every time one of the other teams, I'm kind of like, all right, maybe them. Then they lose 3 or 4 in a row and look bad doing it, and I'm like, I'm out on them again. So yeah, right now, no. I mean, maybe that changes. We're about 6.5 weeks from the regular season wrapping up. So if somebody really catches fire here over the next month or so, I think we could look at it and say, all right, here, that's the team, Miami or Boston maybe. But, the rest of the teams, I just don't think they can do anything to impact, Milwaukee, Philly, or Brooklyn. I think it's really shaping up to be a 3-team race. And because of that, I think it becomes increasingly important that you try and win the conference. So you only need to go through one of the other 2 teams versus having to try to beat both of them.
Yeah, right now, by the way, Brooklyn's won. Boston is actually 8th right now. Let me ask you, Keith, you're very close with the Celtics. You follow them almost on a night-to-night basis as well. What if Boston did not make the playoffs? What would happen there?
Probably nothing good. It would probably start to become, wholesale changes within the roster and, guys really moving in and out, and they might have to give up picks to get off Kemba Walker's contract and things like that. Right now, the roster is constructed can look not even game to game, within the game themselves. They can look like a team where you're like, holy crap, this team's figured it out. They're going to be dangerous the rest of the way. And then the next thing you know, they're down 20 points, and then they rally all the way back and barely lose. They're 23-25, but they have a positive scoring differential, which is not an easy thing to pull off. And that tells you that all their losses are extremely close. And when they win, they're not winning by a ton, but they're winning by at least 2-3 points. And that's what the challenge is. Last night's game against Dallas played out very familiarly to anybody who's watched this team, which is they don't play with effort, for most of the second, or for really the entire second quarter, most of the third quarter. And then towards the end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter, they rally back, they make it a game, they're flying all over the place, they look really good, and then they fall short because they don't have enough to complete the comeback. And that's been kind of the story. And for the first time, we're starting to hear both Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens express real frustration with not understanding, how these guys are not coming out with effort night to night.
It'll be interesting to see how this all shapes up down the stretch in the Eastern Conference. And obviously, as we mentioned, Joel Embiid slated to come back on Saturday night. He will not play tonight against the Cavs, but he should be ready to go when they take on Minnesota on Saturday. We'll see if he plays in the back-to-backs here. Brooklyn, no James Harden tonight. They haven't had Durant for a while. Do you feel like Brooklyn can just put this thing together, throw it out there in the playoffs?
Yeah, and it's going to be hard to do that. I think they need at least 2-3 weeks of their full group together, because what you need to figure out, especially with that team, and ideally you do that and not blow people out by 30 points. You'd rather have those three guys get challenged, playing some tough games, because one of the key things they've still got to figure out is what's our end game pecking order, because no one sweeps all the way through the playoffs with dominant wins all the way to the NBA Finals. It just doesn't happen. Even the Warriors, when they were kind of at the height of their things, and then the Cavs, there was that one year that they both won most of their series 4-0, but they were in some tight games in those series. And it's important that they know, all right, we're tied with 30 seconds left. Who's the shot going to? And I know the answer right now will be, well, whoever's open, is going to take it. But that's not, we know that's not how it works. The ball's going to be in somebody's hands, and you're going to have to figure that out. So that's what you'd like to see over the rest of this. They've got more than enough talent that they should be fine, but you just want to start fine-tuning things and really hitting the playoffs, playing, good, knowing exactly who you are and what your rotations are as you head into those postseason games.
Yeah, I know that that was a story for the Sixers for that year. They got Jimmy Butler, and they had Tobias Harris. It was like, hey, they've only played about 12 games together. Can you just go out there? And they made a run. They went to the seventh game, and I guess the Nets team is talented enough. What about this Milwaukee team, Keith? Do you look at the Bucks as a better team than the one the last 2 years that ran away with the East?
I do, actually. I know that might sound a little weird because they're not doing that, but what they've done is traded short-term losses for long-term gains. There are two big things that really hurt the Bucks in the end. They were great for the regular season, but not so great in the playoffs. One, their offensive and defensive systems, they executed those at an insanely high level, and they were great regular season systems. But when they got in the playoffs, they didn't have anything else to go to, and that was a problem. The other thing was, it sounds great to be, 12 guys deep with quality NBA players until you're playing all of them. And what the Bucks did the last 2 years was, when it was a Tuesday night in Cleveland, they overwhelmed those bad teams like that and beat them by, 20, 30 points. And Giannis, Chris Middleton, their key guys only played, 20, 24 minutes in those games. Then when you got into the postseason, you're not going to play 12 guys. You're not playing bad teams. So what ended up happening was, especially in that second-round series, and Mike Budenholzer said this, admittedly on the record, I can't push Giannis to 40 minutes because that's 10 more minutes than he played in the regular season. He just doesn't have it in him. Chris Middleton can't step up to that level. So this year, they've done two things. One is they're trying new things. Offensively and defensively. And it's cost them a few games, especially defensively. They've mixed in some zones. They've mixed in some switching and defensive coverages that they didn't use. That's hurt them. And then they're only playing about 8 or 9 guys. But their 8 or 9 guys are pretty good. And that's not bearing out on those blowout wins, and you're running over these bad teams. But what it is going to do, I think, is have them in a better position come playoffs. So I'm a lot higher on this Bucks team than I have been the last 2 years.
All right, Keith Smith, and of course, I know last week the trade deadline, the Sixers had made that trade for George Hill, and how does he, in your mind, factor in for Philly with the other two teams? Do you look at that trade and say that? I mean, we know they were trying to get Lowry, they didn't get him. It's been kind of described to our listeners, hey, George Hill is kind of like a poor man's Lowry. He's a veteran guy, ball handler, can hit shots, very good defender. That move to me is almost like Morey saying, look, we're just going to keep adding defensive level players that can, go with that Nets team. But was that enough for you to say, yep, they're in this thing?
Yeah, I wanted to see him get one more shooter, but the prices started to get a little crazy for those guys. So understand why they didn't go that direction. And we're still a week away from the playoff eligibility waiver deadline, which is essentially the end of this buyout season. So there's an opportunity. Maybe somebody still shakes free that could really help them and be an upgrade. But I think what they got with George Hill is this is another guy you can plug in there. He can play with anybody on the roster because he can play either guard spot. He can play on or off the ball. So you're really fine with him as long as he comes back healthy and able to go from the hand injuries he's been working through. So as long as you're there, Yeah, that's a really good fit into your backcourt. In the shooting, you did what you could do in the offseason when you added Green and Curry, so that's an upgrade over anything they've had in prior years. So I think that part you feel better about it. So yeah, I think they've got enough functional depth. Or are they 12 to 15 guys deep? No, but you don't need to be. You only really need about 8 or 9 guys that you really trust in the playoffs, and I think they're there. Now, one thing I do question is with the trade of Tony Bradley, if Embiid needs spotted games down the stretch, if you can't go back to backs, or you really want to give him some rest days, you're really relying heavily on Dwight Howard.
Yeah.
Because Mike Scott, you can't get by with him at the 5. It just doesn't work. He doesn't give you the defensive presence you need. So that's the other position where I would wonder is, if somebody shakes free, could they make a move there to go get a guy like that? But I think it probably is what you see with this roster.
Yeah, I mean, I know they kicked the tire on Georgie's Dang, and that would have been a nice little spot, couple minutes here and there. Is there, off the top of your head, I know you do a lot of the salary cap stuff. Is anybody buyout potential still, or sitting on the street looking for a job? Is Dwayne Dedman still out there?
Dwayne Dedman is still out there, but there's questions. And I may have this wrong, but I believe he recently had a child, so there's some questions about how much he really wants to jump back in at this point. That's probably going to be more of, all right, I took my year off, I'll get back in next year.
Gotcha.
And that's where I'll come back. For big men, DeMarcus Cousins is out there. It sounds like he's maybe going to go to the Clippers. My read on that situation was first good contender to offer him a role he was going to jump at and go. I mean, he's been on the market for most of the season at this point. I don't think he answers any of the questions Philadelphia has. I think you just need somebody who is going to set screens, rebound, and play some defense, which is why I was a little surprised, because they could have got there other ways. That Bradley was the guy who went in that trade, but I can kind of understand it, because I think some of the other guys, they're either young and locked in long term, or they're guys who fill a different kind of role. So we'll see. And as far as other players, I don't think anybody else is gonna shake loose that's really gonna move the needle at all. I think we're pretty much there with the buyout guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because LaMarcus Aldridge goes to the Nets, and everybody. I love what Blake Griffin tweeted out the other day. Everybody says I stink, and then everybody's saying that we got this super team put together. Yeah. How much left do you think? It's fun. Like a couple of years ago, Pau Gasol gets let go. He gets signed, and people are like, "Oh, they got Paul Gasol too." He didn't even make the rotation. Like sometimes these older guys, it's just a name, and you're like, "Oh my gosh!" But does Aldridge, Griffin, do they really, change the dynamics in your mind of where this race is?
I don't think so. I don't know that any of the guys, other than maybe Andre Drummond, just because of the Lakers' injury issues, is going to be that was on the buyout market, is going to be, that big of a game changer. It's funny. I had an executive tell me, this was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, if they're on the buyout market, it's because there was no one offering anything for them in trade. And he goes, if they're that good, someone would have found a way to trade for them. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Now, some of those guys were on such big contracts, it was hard to deal. I think Griffin and Aldridge are going to help the Nets from a depth standpoint, especially for the rest of this regular season, because it seems like they're not going to push their veteran guys overly hard the rest of the way. And that's why I think, Philly and Milwaukee maybe still have a chance to, get past Brooklyn in the standings at the end of the day. But I think, as far as playing major roles in playoff series, Griffin maybe, because he's still a pretty good ball mover. When you have 3 primary scorers, you need guys who can move the ball and keep the offense kind of flowing. So I think he could help there. Aldridge might be able to help, but they've got a young big man, Nick Claxton, who's playing really, really well. He's probably their best all-around big man on the roster right now. And if he sees his minutes cut, because you got to give minutes to Griffin and Aldridge, I think that's a major mistake. And I like what you said, is everybody recognizes these names, and they get all excited by the names. One of my go-to sayings that I say all the time at this time of year is, sometimes these guys become more name than game.
Yeah, well, and you just mentioned Claxton. I was going to ask you as a follow-up here. Last 2 minutes of the game, Sixers and Nets, you got a tie game. Which guy does Steve Nash say, I need you to defend Joel Embiid? Because if it's Aldridge, that's not a matchup I want. And if it's Jordan, we've seen how that's gone. So, I mean, late in the game, you go to Claxton in that situation to defend Joel Embiid?
Yeah, that's going to be tough, and that's where I'm a little worried about the Nets. I think who do they defend Embiid with, especially this Embiid, where he's engaged for 48 minutes a night, and he's kind of been on the attack, and in this I'm going to score on you mode. That becomes really, really tough. I think the other thing that becomes a challenge for them is defending a guy like Giannis. They don't have a great guy to put on him. Now, let's be fair. Very few teams are looking at it and saying, yeah, we got guys who can stop those guys, right? That's why they're two of the best, dead players in the game. But that's a challenge. I almost wonder if the best thing you do if you're the Nets is, we're going to go small and make Embiid have to chase on the other end of the floor. And, we'll try to play it that way and all right, maybe we give up points, but you try and defend us. Where are you going to, try, who are you going to put Embiid on? That might be the best route you can go because they don't have a good answer for him.
That's true. I mean, what do you do in that situation? Go with like Blake Griffin at the 5 with Durant, Kyrie, and Harden, and I guess anybody like my grandmother could be out there as the 5th.
or do you go super small and go something like Durant, Harden, Irving, Joe Harris, and Bruce Brown, who's been playing big, and just then who does Embiid cover? Because that's 5 perimeter guys. That's not a good answer for Philadelphia, and that's something I think Brooklyn has, which is going to be a little bit scary. They only went to it a few times early in the year when Kevin Durant was healthy, when they went to him at the 5, and it's rough defensively, but boy, is it hard to stop on offense.
It is, but I'll tell you, and I know this matchup might not even happen. The Sixers only play the Nets one time, April 14th. That's it. But the Sixers are the one team with the defense. I'd love to see what do they do with Simmons? Who do they kind of put him on? Do they give Thibault more minutes in that type of series? Does George Hill get more minutes over Curry and play defense? I mean, those 3 guys there are very good defensive players. You've got Tobias has played, and, of course, Joel Embiid. And as you said, if they go really small, what does that mean there? That series would have a lot of chess pieces in it, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, one thing that I will trust on a little bit there on Philadelphia's side is Doc Rivers and his experience. I think Doc, has some stuff that he will go to. I think, you mentioned they play in a couple weeks. I would not be surprised if that's one of those games where both teams are just playing it to get it over with. Maybe somebody has the, infamous back spasms, on the day of the game. They don't play because I don't think either one wants to show the other one anything. And I don't think either one has much to learn out of that. And as you said, maybe the matchup doesn't even materialize in the playoffs. But that's one of those things where think in the East, because of the separation between Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and Milwaukee, they can do some of that gamesmanship where you can't really do that in the Western Conference because everything is so tight. Everybody's fighting for seeding. I think in the East, you can kind of play those games and say, I'm not going to show you anything because I feel pretty confident there's a good chance I might see you down the line.
All right. Of course, Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports, covers the NBA. We've got about a month left to go, a little over a month left to go in the NBA season. Sixers tonight against the Cavs. By the way, Cleveland's beaten Philly both times this season. If Philly wins the game tonight, they would be 4-2 on this trip without Joel Embiid, and that would make them 9-8 without Joel Embiid on the season. Pretty crazy when you think about how bad they've been without Embiid. And by the way, how bad they were on the road last year with or without Embiid. To say they'd have a 4-2 trip without him would be a definite win. They play Saturday, Minnesota, Sunday, Memphis, and then Boston on Tuesday. So that will be interesting to see that. Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports NBA. Follow him at Keith Smith NBA on Twitter. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Keith, always great, man. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Y'all stay safe. You and yours.
All right. He is awesome as always. He'll be back on Thursday next week. We will be getting into a lot more interesting, busy week for the Sixers.